Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Convention of States, Indiana Live. I always like to lead off with this question. Do you think we have a big problem with our federal government in Washington, D.C.? Well, if you do, stay tuned, because we at Convention of States have a solution as big as the problem. Well, welcome again, everyone. My name is Dale Parrish. I'm the state director for Convention of States here in Indiana, and I want to welcome you to this evening's broadcast. We've got a very, very good broadcast lined up for you tonight. I hope you enjoy it. As usual, we got the broadcast is going to be in about 3 different segments. The first segment will be a discussion period, and we're going to have one of the regulars here on our program, Paul Phillips, will be joining us. And Paul and I are going to talk about the founder who refused to sign the Constitution. And I think that's going to be a very, very interesting topic for you tonight. The individual in question, who you will find out soon, has become very, very important to our organization, Convention of States. So that'll be in segment 1. Segment 2, I'm going to give you just some general information about what's going on here in the state of Indiana. And then in segment 3, we're going to get into the basics of Convention of States. This is something we do every broadcast. We'll be talking about the 3 tenets or the basics of Convention of States that all of us in the movement, not only locally here in Indiana, but nationally, we all follow these tenets and promote these as part of what we're all about. So without further ado, I want to go ahead and bring Paul in. He's combing his hair right now and getting ready to come on. So I'll go ahead and bring him in. Hi, Paul.
Hey, Dale.
Sorry, I had to say that. I saw you kind of fixing your hair at the last minute.
Yeah, it looks a little messy. I hope it looks okay tonight.
Hey, listen. Before we get started, there's one more thing I meant to tell everyone about, and that's my warning that I always try to issue, and that is that in the event that your screen would freeze up or go blank, just assume that we've had a technical problem, and it has happened and probably will happen again. But in the event that that does happen, don't hang around. Don't wait for us to come back on, because it just takes too long to get everything up and going again. Just plan on joining us again next Monday evening at 7 p.m. So, sorry, Paul, I forgot to get that in.
No worries.
Before I brought you on. So, not that you're a technical problem in any way, but you just happen to be. Well, okay. Let me get ready for you here, Paul. And you know, I mentioned the topic that we're going to talk about being the founder that refused to sign the Constitution. Who was that, Paul, and why?
That would be Colonel George Mason, a delegate from Virginia. And he refused to sign the Constitution because he basically thought it wasn't complete. There was some more work to do, and there were some improvements that he wanted to make.
Okay. But he is considered, am I right, the father of Article 5?
Yes, he is. It was on September 15th, 2 days before the Constitutional Convention closed, that he noticed that there was no provision in the Constitution for amendments other than those that Congress would suggest. And he thought that wouldn't work. In fact, he said that that Congress would never recommend the proper kind of amendments if they got too powerful. So they would never pare back their power. So we needed a way to do that.
Okay. Okay. Now, we call him the father of Article 5, but in fact, he didn't actually write it. Am I correct?
Right. He pointed out the error or the omission. And then two of the other delegates, Gouverneur Morris and Elbridge Gerry, according to James Madison's notes from the convention, they made a motion to amend the article to the form that we're used to seeing it today, which gives 2/3 of the states the power to call a convention.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, I know though Colonel Mason was had a great influence in other areas, and even had an influence on the Declaration of Independence, right?
Excuse me. Yes, he did. When Thomas Jefferson was authoring the Declaration of Independence, one of the documents he had in front of him was Colonel Mason's first draft of the Virginia Declaration of Rights. So that familiar part of the Declaration, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, and so on. That paragraph is, if you read the Virginia Declaration of Rights, is heavily lifted or sourced from there. So he had a great influence on his fellow Virginian who wrote the Declaration.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, let's get. We said that he had objections, right?
Yes,
I always thought it was interesting. And where did he record these objections?
He recorded his objections on the back of his copy of the Declaration of Independence.
It's very interesting. Very interesting. Well, he had a number of objections. So let's get into the and briefly talk about each one, if we could.
Sure.
I think the first one, which was really, he had some really powerful objections, quite honestly, and they led to some very significant things. And this very first one is a prime example: no Declaration of Rights.
That's correct. He was concerned, had just mentioned the Virginia Declaration of Rights used as a source for the Declaration of Independence. He was looking for something similar in the Constitution. So he had a lot to do with the Bill of Rights that we're used to relying on today when we think of the Constitution.
Okay. All right. Now, explain this next one, Paul. Something about the number of representatives.
Yeah, he was concerned that the House of Representatives, in his words, there wasn't the substance of representation, just the shadow of it. And by that, he was concerned as the country grew, there was not a provision for enough representation. In the early days of the country, there were roughly 30,000 citizens represented per member of the House of Representatives. Okay. And of the 12 initial proposed amendments, the first one eventually would have set the maximum number of people a representative could represent at 50,000. And that was never ratified. And where we are today is we have about 750,000 people per representative in the House of Representatives, which basically makes those representatives pretty inaccessible to us.
Right.
If we would be organized according to that proposed amendment, and there would be 50,000 people per representative, we would have between 5,000 and 6,000 members of the House of Representatives. And at first that may seem impossible or a dream, but really that number of representatives is roughly the number of state representatives across all 50 states. There are about 5,000 of those. So what he was really advocating for was our members of the House of Representatives being every bit as accessible to us as our state representatives. It'd be somebody in your community, you know where they live, it's easy to contact them and spend time with them.
Very, very interesting. You really believed in the people being involved with their representatives, didn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, now this next objection, he had an objection that had to do with the judiciary, with the court system or something, didn't he?
Yes, he had a concern with the power of the Supreme Court over the state courts. And he basically thought that the Supreme Court took too much power away from the states to rule themselves. Kind of being foreseeing a day when whatever the Supreme Court said was law of the land. Does that sound kind of familiar?
It does, doesn't it? Yes. Very interesting. I tell you, Colonel had some real insights. He really did. He really did. And I think this next one, I think, is very humorous. He had an opinion of the position of vice president, didn't he?
Yeah, he thought that was basically a useless position. In fact, he said that it was an unnecessary officer who, for the want of other employment, is made president of the Senate. So he just thought it was a waste of a position, basically.
Okay. Now, this next objection I thought was really wonderful insight. The general welfare clause.
Yeah, he thought the way the general welfare clause was worded, that a future Congress might use it to justify spending money on anything that they wanted. Now imagine that happening. I don't know where he came up with that.
But just great insight, and that is exactly what has happened with the general welfare clause. All right, very good. Now, he had one more objection that we want to touch on, right?
Right. The power of international treaties. So the Constitution says that the Constitution and any treaties that have been ratified are the supreme law of the land. And his concern was that the government could circumvent the legislative process and just make a treaty agreement with another country, or in our case, maybe with the UN, and then by virtue of that agreement, impose a law that would override state or federal law.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, he wouldn't sign, and actually went on to be one of the leading anti-federalists, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So, and I think the best way to frame the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists, the Federalists supported the Constitution, and they wanted to enact it or ratify it as is, where the Anti-Federalists wanted some changes first, specifically a Bill of Rights, before the states ratified. And that was really the tension between the two groups. It wasn't like the Anti-Federalists were against the Constitution. They just thought it needed a little more work. It wasn't quite ready for prime time. So what ended up happening was an agreement to ratify the Constitution with a commitment that the first Congress would address the Bill of Rights, which, as we know, they did.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, to kind of sum up, Colonel Mason, our whole organization is pretty well centered around him.
Yeah. Had he not objected 2 days before the close of the convention that there was not a method for the states to propose amendments to the Constitution, Convention of States wouldn't exist, and we wouldn't have this tool to rein in an out of control federal government.
We just need to use the tool that has been provided to us.
Yep, I like to think he'd be proud of us for trying.
I think so. I think so. All right, Paul. Well, once again, thank you very much. Now, again, we're going to be, you're coming back again with us next week, next Monday evening. And we're going to talk about Indiana being a past state. And in other words, we've passed this application to hold a convention. And we're going to talk about what that means and why we continue to need the support of people for this effort. So should be another interesting. Anything you wanted to comment about that?
Well, yeah, I think the real question we're going to answer that we get a lot of is, since Indiana's already passed, what does it matter if another Indiana citizen supports us or signs our petition? And the answer is it matters a lot, and we're going to tell you why.
Okay, good. All right, Paul, thank you very much.
Sure, thanks, Dale.
All right, well, let me bring up for segments 2 and 3. I need to bring up my PowerPoint here. And of course, the best way on this PowerPoint is to get it so the whole screen is filled with the PowerPoint so you can see it easily and the best. Okay, in this segment 2, I want to give just some general information about what's happening here in our state. We have a number of resources available to us here in Indiana, and at the top of the list is our national website, conventionofstates.com. So please, the very first thing you should do is go to that website if you haven't been there before. There's a wealth of information there. That's where you need to sign the petition, open an account. We'll be talking about this a little bit more as we go along here. But conventionofstates.com. Now, embedded in that national website is we have an Indiana state website page, conventionofstates.com/Indiana. So you'll want to take a look at what we have there for you pertaining just to the state of Indiana. Now, we're also on various social media platforms. We're on Facebook, Convention of States, Indiana. As a matter of fact, this broadcast is coming to you through our state Facebook page. So look for us on Facebook, Convention of States, Indiana. We have a YouTube channel, COS Indiana. Excuse me. Now, this YouTube channel is primarily really an educational resource for you. We have a number of narrated PowerPoint presentations that I've put on there. Recordings of these past broadcasts are also on there. And Paul does a podcast called Free to Be Free. And we have links on our YouTube channel to all of his podcasts. So many of his podcasts we use as resources for our broadcast. As a matter of fact, tonight's topic on the founder that refused to sign the Constitution came from one of his podcasts, okay? So please check out Paul's podcast. We're also on Twitter, COS, #COS Indiana, Instagram, Convention of States, Indiana. We're getting on LinkedIn, and so we may be on some others by now that I'm not aware of, but we're trying our best to reach out to all of you in various ways that technology provides us today. Now, let me give you some quick numbers. Last year, 2018, we hit 30,000 supporters here in the state of Indiana. We've been growing tremendously, been experiencing about a 40% growth rate. So given that growth rate, we're striving in 2019 to hit 40,000 supporters here in the state. Of the supporters, we have about 2,900 people that have indicated a willingness to volunteer if called upon. And we have about 40 individuals in leadership positions. Now, here's an opportunity for you. If you have any desire to get more involved in convention estates here in the state of Indiana, go to our national website, conventionestates.com, click on the menu selection, Take Action, scroll down and look at the different volunteer opportunities that we have available. If one's of interest, open it up, read about it. If you're still interested, go ahead and make application. You're not obligated in any way. But what that does is your name then pops up on a report that I, as well as a few others, see, and one of us will then be in contact with you to further discuss your interest. So we need more leaders. So I would encourage you, please, if you have a desire to get involved, go to the website, look at the volunteer positions, and make application to one that is of interest to you. All right, let's get in now the third segment of our presentation tonight, and that's the Convention Estates basics. There are 3 tenets that are involved in the basics of Convention Estates: the problem, the solution, and the plan. So let's talk about the problem. The problem basically is that our government is out of control and will not relinquish power. In other words, there are we believe, some structural issues that are not being addressed by our federal government. And we're not blaming any one particular party, because both parties have contributed to this problem. It's been going on for decades. It's not necessarily a current thing, but it's been going on for decades. Basically, our elected officials lack the will and the courage to address this problem. Now, we've identified what we call abuses, 3 abuses by the federal government that comprise this problem. And the first one, briefly, is our national debt. Of course, if you follow this at all, you know that the debt is now in excess of $22 trillion, maybe to 23 by now, but certainly over $22 trillion. Unfunded liabilities, the last number I heard, 250 trillion, just unbelievable numbers. And very little to nothing is being done to address this particular abuse by the federal government, our national debt. The second abuse has to do with our regulatory crisis. Yes, I know the current administration has eliminated some regulations, but this is our administrative state. Much, much more needs to be done in this area with regard to regulations. Also, what needs to be done is some control over the process of how regulations are created. So the regulatory crisis, the 4th branch of government, is the second abuse of the government that we've identified. The third abuse has to do with state sovereignty. You know, when our country was founded, the government was created based on a concept of dual federalism, where the states and the federal government would equally share in power. Well, obviously that has all tilted toward the federal government. And you can name different things involved here: power, money. We think the career politician plays a role in this too. So this is an area where I think we need to address with term limits, but I'll get into that a little bit more later. So those are the 3 abuses by the federal government that we've identified. Well, what's our solution? Our solution is that we believe we should hold a convention of states for the purpose of amending the Constitution to address these abuses. Article 5 of our Constitution describes, and this is what we talked about with Colonel Mason in our first segment, Article 5 describes 2 methods to propose amendments to the Constitution. One we're very familiar with, the other one we're not. So let's look at those very closely here, just briefly. The first method of amending the Constitution is where Congress, 2/3 of Congress, proposes an amendment, and then that amendment has to then be ratified by 3/4 of the state legislatures, which would be 38 states. Once ratified, then that proposed amendment becomes an amendment to the Constitution. Well, there is a second method, and we're not making this up. This is right in Article 5 of our Constitution, and that is where 2/3 of the state legislatures can apply to hold a convention of states for the purpose of amending the Constitution. Any proposed amendments that come out of that convention would then have to go through the same ratification process as in the first method, 3/4 or, yes, 3/4 of the states would have to, or 38 states, I'm getting confused here. It takes 2/3 or 34 of the states to make application to hold the convention. Any proposed amendments would also then have to be ratified by 3/4 or 38 states before they would become amendments to the Constitution. Those numbers can always be confusing to people, and even me, okay? Our plan is in two parts, and the first part has to do with our application strategy. We need to get 34 states to make application to hold this convention, and all the applications have to be the same. That's called aggregation. So in Convention of States, we have actually devised the application. We've actually created the application that we want the states to use. And in that application, in the subject matter of the application, we address fiscal restraints, limiting the power and jurisdiction of the government, and term limits. And those are the three areas that we want. See, it's that subject matter that determines the agenda of the convention. And those are the three areas that we want to address, which will address the three abuses of the federal government that we outlined in the problem. Now, the second part of our plan is mobilizing the grassroots. And when I say the grassroots, I'm talking about you and me and our state legislators. So mobilizing the grassroots to make this happen. So I hope you will join us in this effort. We, as I mentioned, in Indiana, we have over 30,000 supporters. We have over 3.9 million supporters across the country. We're in all 50 states now. So the momentum is moving along. We have 15 states that have passed the application, or also referred to as the resolution. And we need to get to that magic number of 34. So please, if you have any inclination, any desire to get involved, we would love to hear from you. All right, let me get back now to, we're now about to the closing part. I want to recognize anyone that has been tuning in to us tonight. Let's see if I can get James Cressy has been a regular, and I think James is located in Missouri. James, I want to thank you for joining us again. And his comment is, stand with Betsy Ross. Yes, that's certainly been in the news here, hasn't it? Okay, let me see if I can now, this individual, Jerry Rowe, is, hi Paul and Jerry Rowe is one of our state information analysts here in Indiana. So he's part of our organization. And I appreciate Jerry joining us on these broadcasts. So Jerry, thank you for joining in tonight. Appreciate you being there, man. All right, let's see who else has been up here. Michelle, Sylvie, I see you here. Thank you for joining us. That was James. Uh, Bill Jameson. Bill, I think, don't know if I recall your name before, but thank you for joining us tonight. And please consider joining us again next Monday evening at 7 p.m. And I want to close with a quote that one of our founders of Convention Estates is known for, and I just love this quote of his, and I use it to close every broadcast. And his quote, and that gentleman is Mark Meckler, one of our founders in Convention Estates. And his quote is basically that our country is faced with a fundamental question. And that fundamental question is not what should we do? The fundamental question is who will decide? So the question facing us is a two-word question, very simply, who decides? And we believe here in Convention Estates that we believe we, the people, should have more of a say-so in who decides. So there's where we are. And once again, I want to thank you for joining us this evening. And again, put us on your calendar for next Monday evening and at 7 p.m. And we'll have another discussion and give it another run. So thank you all for joining. Have a good evening. Good night.